The views expressed on Skeptically Speaking are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
Bring it on! The skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. 'Cause we're skeptically speaking.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Shell. This week we're exploring the science of cellular phones. Researcher and blogger Scicurious returns to the show to walk us through the data on how cell phones do and don't affect us, and why the studies that we read aren't always as clear-cut as they sound. But first, we'll speak to Marc MacKenzie for the medical perspective on the radiation at the heart of this technology. Thanks for listening. I'm here with Dr. Marc MacKenzie, medical physicist at the Cross Cancer Institute, who is not in any way speaking for the Cross Cancer Institute. Welcome back to the show, Marc.
It's a pleasure to be back.
So help me out here. Today's episode is all about the cell phone hysteria that has taken over the news cycle, or at least the internet. And something that I am hearing over and over in a lot of these posts is how, of course, cell phones cause cancer because it's like putting a microwave up to the side of your face. So is it anything at all like that?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in that it is using the same part of the electromagnetic spectrum, roughly, as microwave ovens. They're radio frequency waves. It does result in some energy being imparted through what's called dielectric heating. But that's where the similarity stops in terms of the magnitude of what's going on. When you have a conventional microwave oven, it's operating at roughly, 750 watts, a kilowatt of power. And on the other end, we've got cell phones, which are regulated to run in the milliwatt range. And so we're talking about going from milliwatts to kilowatts. That's a factor of 1,000,000. That's 6 orders of magnitude, as we like to say. It's a huge difference. That being said, there is going to be some dielectric heating. But the amount of heating going on from your cell phone, we can model it. There's a method we use called finite element modeling, where you can model the transmission of that energy into the side of your head. And that looks kind of scary, but it's less heating energy than you'd get from running in place for even a very brief period. We're talking, a 10-second kind of ha-ha-ha. If you're easily winded, maybe it's going to be less. But it doesn't take much body energy to increase the amount of heat and blood flow to your brain, and that far outstrips anything you get from a cell phone. As far as we know, the only biological effects that can be realized from microwave radiations comes from when heat cannot be dissipated quickly enough. So we actually have safety codes in Canada. Health Canada has these safety codes which regulate how much energy can be deposited in the body. And we measure that in watts per kilogram. It's a specific absorption rate, and that's regulated for cell phones, where it doesn't even remotely approach the levels that are regulated. And they're also regulated for magnetic resonance imaging, because actually that uses radio waves as well. The reason it's regulated is because some parts of your body, like your lenses, cannot dissipate heat because there's not a lot of blood flow there. And it's been known that with a lot of heating, you will get cataract formation. But that's because heat cannot be dissipated. And as far as we know, there are no other thermal effects that occur at low levels.
How exactly do microwaves work, now that we're on the topic?
Okay, well, there's a coupling between the electromagnetic field and any non-conductor, a dielectric. And it's called dielectric heating. And it's essentially you get a vibrational sympathy being set up between that electromagnetic field and the material. And so some of the energy gets transmitted to those vibrational modes. And that shows up as heat energy. And that was sort of a neat thing that was discovered. I mean, microwaves, a lot of the experimentation with microwaves goes back to sort of the mid-30s, where there's something called a magnetron, and it's inside microwave ovens. It's also, I use them at my workplace. They're in machines that we use for making high-energy X-rays for treating cancer. They produce microwave radiation. They used them in World War II for radar installations. But somebody noticed, and I think it was in the 50s or the late 40s, where it was noticed that nearby things were actually heating up when they had high-power microwaves running. And then somebody got the brilliant idea, well, maybe we could use this to cook food. And so that's how we got the microwave oven eventually, sort of the mid-late 50s. We started to see the production of microwave ovens, but of course they didn't really become popular until, I guess, the 70s?
Well, speaking of the 70s, my mother wouldn't let me stand in front of our microwave at all when I was young because of the radiation. So does it work like that? Are microwaves that unsafe, or at least were they that unsafe?
I'm not positive I can actually speak to the engineering safety of microwaves. The way it's supposed to work, and actually you can test out how good your microwave shielding is working with your cell phone. You can put your cell phone, don't turn on the microwave oven, don't turn it on, but you can put your cell phone inside the oven and see if you can call it. And if it can get absolutely no reception in there, that's a good thing, because you should get no bars inside a microwave oven. It's kind of a neat thing. Whenever you have if you have a perfect conductor or a near perfect conductor surrounding something, electromagnetic radiation cannot penetrate that. It's called a Faraday cage. We actually use them again at my workplace when we have magnetic resonance imaging suites, rooms where we do the imaging. One of the first things that they do is they actually line the walls with copper. So you've got a really good conductor. And that's not so much to keep electromagnetic radiation from getting out, but more to keep noisy signals from getting in and interfering with your images. So microwave ovens, similarly, are a Faraday cage. That's supposed to stop any radiation from getting out. Would it be a bad thing? Well, the Health Canada here in Canada and the FDA in the U.S. regulate how much radiation is permissible to leak out of your microwave. And again, it's regulated down at the same levels as your cell phone. You're not allowed to heat tissue up more than at a certain rate, and it's an incredibly slow rate. Again, we're talking in this case about a factor of about 1,000 between what it would take to heat water about 1 degree Celsius and what you're allowed to give. So we're talking thousandths of a degree Celsius is what microwaves are allowed to be heating tissue up at. And again, if you feel yourself getting hot after a run, your body's producing far more energy naturally than you're going to be getting from microwaves.
Well, now that you just mentioned a subtopic of this, you and I did an entire episode on radiation and health back in the day. But for those who haven't listened to that episode, can you just clear up the difference between radiation and cancer? Because people almost use them interchangeably sometimes.
Let's quickly talk about the electromagnetic spectrum, right? I guess our comfort zone for the electromagnetic spectrum is visible light. The light coming from the sun, from the light bulb in this room, it's all radiation. It's energy being transported from one place to another. Some of it's visible. Heat is transmitted through infrared radiation. And that kind of radiation and microwaves and radio waves are non-ionizing. So they don't have enough energy to knock loose electrons and make atoms more reactive. Whereas when we start to get into ultraviolet radiation, and you should be careful about ultraviolet radiation. So I'm not somebody who's ever going to tell people to be blasé about radiation. Mm-hmm. Wear sunscreen. I think you're far, far better off worrying about making sure that you wear sunscreen than worrying about your cell phone. So wear sunscreen. That's ionizing radiation. X-rays and gamma rays can cause cancer. There's no question. But that also being said, it's hard to say at what threshold you're going to get an effect. For safety purposes, we always assume that there's no safe threshold, so we always try it at my workplace when we have a radiation therapy vault. We shield it. We put enough thick concrete between the operators and the patients to make sure that so little radiation gets through that it's at a safe level. And it's at levels that are below what occurs naturally. We're bathed in radiation all the time. Not just the visible stuff that I was talking about, but even those X-rays, high-energy particles that I'm talking about as well, that are ionizing radiation. We're bathed in it. Our body contains radionuclides, naturally occurring isotopes. Some proportion of all atoms are radioactive naturally. There's radioactivity in the soil naturally. There's cosmic radiation that occurs naturally. And does it cause cancer at high enough levels? No question. And is there a threshold where it's safe? We don't know, so we play it safe. We say, let's shield it up. How is that different from microwaves? Microwaves, there's no known mechanism. There's no good study that says definitively there's a link. And I know you're going to talk about this elsewhere in the show, but there was that recent announcement from the World Health Organization where it listed as a possible carcinogen. And again, it's not based on any new information that says this is it, here's a definitive link. It's mostly based on one study where there was an inconclusive link. And again, there's no known mechanism.
What do you think about that study then? What do you think about the World Health Organization's announcement?
Well, about that study, I think that's a fair thing that they do and should look at these things, and we should continue looking at the question. But in the meantime, there's no real compelling reason to believe that there's a large-scale danger, any more so than there's a large-scale danger from anything else that's on the list of possible carcinogens. They call it the 2B list, and it includes coffee, which has been implicated for bladder cancer, and I don't see the same people that are shouting about microwaves setting up websites and foundations and going on tears about coffee. There's a possible link. More study needs to be done, but it's not something I'm going to worry about. I'd worry a lot more about wearing sunscreen. I'd rather see websites that are going up warning people about the dangers of skin cancer. That's a real issue.
And do you think that the problem is just that cell phones are a new technology, and so that's where a lot of this hysteria comes from? I'm assuming that the same thing happened when microwaves were introduced.
There probably was some concern. Is it just hysteria over a new thing? That's hard to say. I think there's probably been some concern all along. Electromagnetic radiation is it's a bit of a creepy thing in a way, right? The ionizing radiation, the non-ionizing radiation, it's colorless, it's odorless, it's there all the time. You can't see it, you can't feel it. At least I don't think you can feel it. There's some people who say that they actually have electromagnetic hypersensitivity where they can feel it, which I think would be most remarkable if they could. I don't buy it. But it's a bit of a creepy thing. So I think some people are kind of uncomfortable with that. They want to know what that's doing. And they look at other examples where they were told, X is safe, and it turns out it's not.
Right. For example, the tobacco industry. And a lot of people are making that comparison.
They are, but I think it's an unfair comparison. When I see people with lung cancer being so hugely, disproportionately smokers. So if you draw that Venn diagram of lung cancer sufferers
right.
and smokers, the overlap is huge. Whereas you can't say the same thing about cell phone users and people with brain cancer. We haven't shown that at all. For a long time, the tobacco industry had to work hard to cover up what people seemed to be knowing fairly early on but couldn't prove right away. I don't think the cell phone industry has to work really hard at covering anything up. We're studying this. It's not really been shown that there is something to really worry about there. So I don't think it's a fair comparison. I think almost a better comparison would be to the anti-vaccine crowd, who were convinced that there was a link. They would, grasp at straws. There were some flawed studies, and that's almost been put to rest, that there is no link between autism and vaccines.
I've never made that link between the anti-vaccination groups.
Well, I think it's interesting that some people, they get really panicked about something. They look for links. They see an issue. They see cancer, and they ask themselves, well, why? Why is this happening? And they'll look for links, and sometimes they'll find the right link, like in smoking, or in the case of asbestos, there's a link there. And other times they'll find other things, like cell phones, and there may be no causal link. And again, I'm not going to say there is no link. We have to keep studying it. But right now, the evidence looks like if there is any link, it's so weak, you're better off wearing sunscreen and not worrying about it.
So back to microwaves. Is there anything that's dangerous about microwaves at this point? Are we still doing research into microwave technology? Or are we so far past that point, and maybe at some point we'll be in that same place with cell phones?
So people are still doing studies on microwaves and health. And it's not my direct field of study. I mean, when I'm at work, there are some issues around safety with radio waves, non-ionizing radiation, but my research is mostly involved with ionizing radiation. But other people are definitely still looking at the question. Study continues because people just want to know. It's an interesting question. Is there any kind of effect at all? And some people say they've shown an effect. Other people have tried to replicate some of those studies and can't. Other people say, I've shown an effect and I don't think those studies have been replicated. And other people have said, I've shown no effect and I'm not sure if those studies have been replicated. But that's science, you know. You don't do one study and say, I found it. Other people have to independently reproduce that work and show what you've shown. And you have to look at confounding factors. Did you control for every variable? Or was it a bad study? And there are some researchers, you know, not naming any Canadian researchers who work at Trent University,
right,
who I think have done some studies that just me looking at them, I think I can see some flaws in there. And I'd love to see an independent researcher confirm or deny what's gone on there. It's interesting. You know, I think studying research is never a bad thing. Knowledge is not a bad thing. And I also think that people who are a little too certain on either end of the spectrum is a bad thing. I think you need to keep an open mind and a little uncertainty. And I think I see on both ends of the spectrum people who say there is no possible link. I say keep studying. And those who say there is a definite link and it's so incredibly dangerous and why can't you people see that? I think that's not a good thing either.
And we'll be right back with more on cell phones with Scicurious after this.
Skeptically Speaking wants you to question everything. To be a part of the discussion, call and record your question on our listener question line at Speak 73101. That's 773-257-3101. Long-distance charges may apply. Sunday nights at 6 Mountain Time, join our Ustream chat room to listen and ask questions as we record interviews live. Just click the Listen Online button at skepticallyspeaking.com. You can also email your questions and comments to live@skepticallyspeaking.com, or if you're on Twitter, tweet us at Skeptical Radio. To find out where Skeptically Speaking airs near you, to listen to past episodes, or download the weekly podcast, check out our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, follow the links to connect with us on our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, or to subscribe to the show in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
I'm here with Scicurious, postdoctoral researcher with professional interests in neurophysiology, specifically the interactions of neurotransmitter systems. She's also the author of the blog Neurotic Physiology, which I honestly think has some of the funniest and most accessible science writing on the internet. Welcome back, Sci.
Thanks. It's so great to be here.
You also brought a friend.
Oh, I did, yes. Because I am rather nervous about today's topic, I have with me my blogging companion. She is a large pink squid hat, and she has a placebo effect of +4 to intelligence. So, if I'm bad today, just blame the squid hat.
You have just made so many nerds so happy.
Fitting it on over the headphones was really hard.
So today we're talking about cell phones, and the reason why Sci is nervous is because Sci and I scheduled this episode about a month and a half ago, approximately, and it seemed like a good thing to discuss because there's a lot of confusion around the topic. And then the internet blew up.
Yeah, basically. Well, it was more like my Twitter feed, and then the internet followed suit about, 24 hours later.
Well, let's get the big stuff out of the way first then. The World Health Organization put out a report this week. Can you tell us about that?
It was actually the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer. And they didn't actually put out a report. They released a press release. They will be releasing a report.
Right.
It's not out yet. At least I looked on the internet for today, and it appears not to be out yet. But the press release is out, and they classified the electromagnetic radiation from cell phones as being in class 2B, which is the class called possibly causes cancer. And the cancer they're actually referring to is the cancer glioma, which is a cancer of the glia, which is the white matter that we usually think of as being support cells in our brain. It's a highly aggressive cancer, but it's also extremely rare.
So what was this press release based on then? Is it new studies?
It's based on a review of studies on cell phones. So it is based on recent studies that came out earlier in 2011 and 2010, etc., but they did no research of their own. It's just a review of the current literature on cell phones and cancer and cell phone effects on the brain, etc.
So does this press release that is the first stage of the report, is that telling us that cell phones do have cancer suddenly after all these years and all these studies?
I don't know. It means that cell phones could possibly cause cancer. It means you don't know. It's unlikely. Many physicians and scientists believe that it is actually physically impossible. But we don't we don't know. There are some studies, particularly out of this one group in Sweden, there's a bunch of studies saying that cell phones do increase the incidence of glioma. There are a bunch of studies, including this big study called the Interphone study, that show that cell phones cause no increase in the risk of glioma. The reality is that you can always prove that something does cause cancer, but you can almost never disprove that something causes cancer.
Right. That's actually really important for people to know. And let's try and give people a background in this, because the report itself, it will be talking about the risk of cell phones causing cancer then. So how are they assessing that risk?
They are assessing risk based on the literature made up of studies where they compared people with brain cancers, some usually gliomas. They also compared meningiomas, which are cancers of the meningeal coverings over the brain. And they compare them to healthy controls. They ask about their cell phone use, and they look for correlations. And this is where you get the whole point where you can't ever disprove. You can show there's no correlation. You can even show there is a correlation, but correlation is not causation. And
as
even
we
when
keep
you show
saying over and over on this show, yes.
Yeah, and so they're looking also at literature about cell phone use and brain activity. They're basically looking to see that there's an increase in various cancers as a result of the cell phone use. And they have not actually seen that. There's been a very, very small increase in the incidence of glioma in the past 20 years, but it's mostly due to the fact that we have MRIs now, which can find them.
Right.
Because, before you couldn't really do that. But there has not actually, none of the studies reference a massive increase in cancers, in brain cancers.
Let's talk about the WHO's sort of categories. They've broken the risk factor of different things into categories. Can you explain the categories?
Okay, so there are 5 categories, and actually this, all of this information about categories and what is in each category with the World Health Organization is available online, and it's actually really interesting reading if you're into that sort of thing. I was reading it over coffee yesterday, and I was really interested. It was cool. So there's risk factor 1, which is things that definitely cause cancer. That includes things like the human papillomavirus that we know causes cervical cancer, alcohol, formaldehyde, tobacco. There's actually a liver fluke in there that causes cancer. Radionucleotides, the sun, things that cause cancer.
Right.
And risk factor 2 is broken down into 2 risk factors, 2A and 2B. So 2A is the stuff that probably causes cancer. And that's probably causes cancer. Most of it's heavily, it's major chemical stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense to people who aren't chemists.
Right.
But includes the stuff I use on the daily to make gels. It includes a mutagen that I actually use to make mutations in mice at work. So, some of these are useful to me. And then 2B is the category they put cell phones in. And that category is called possibly causes cancer. So 2A is probably causes cancer. 2B is possibly causes cancer. Big difference.
So what's in 2B?
A lot of stuff. My favorites, however, are things like chloroform, carpentry.
Wait, carpentry like the industry?
I think the activity.
The wood and the such.
Yeah, making furniture.
Oh, okay.
I think.
All right.
It just says
continue.
carpentry. Yeah. Coconut oil, is usually found in sunblock. Coffee, which means I'm screwed.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah. Let's see. Dry cleaning, being a firefighter, gasoline, low-frequency magnetic fields, pickled vegetables of the Chinese variety. Not any other kinds of pickled vegetables, no. Surgical implants, volatile anesthetics, stuff like that. The one that concerns me most is actually the coffee.
Absolutely. But surgical implants, so are we talking like silicone breast implants kind of implants? Those as well?
It depends on the material. I think the surgical implants here, they're talking about ceramics, stuff like that.
So things that doctors put inside your body are potentially carcinogenic.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you sit there and go, okay, all this medical technology, it's causing us cancer. And you sit there and go, man, if it weren't for the 15 to 20 years of increased life expectancy, all that technology would be a jerk, man. We don't need that.
Okay, so do continue on with the categories, but I really wanted to give a lot of comparisons in 2B.
Right, yeah. So category 3 is not classifiable for cancer. And that either means because they haven't done enough studies on it or because studies just have not shown a link. Remember, it's really hard to disprove this.
Right.
But it includes things like BPA, that thing that was in all your plastic water bottles, which is really, it may cause a lot of things, but it does not cause cancer. It includes caffeine, separate from coffee. Chlorinated drinking water, which is all of your drinking water. Diazepam, which is an anti-anxiety drug. Low-frequency electric fields, fluorescent lighting, hair dye, leather tanning, other kinds of surgical implants, paper.
See, this makes me never want to leave my house again.
No, those are things that are not classifiable for cancer.
Well, that's good. But see, this is really the problem that we're running into here is the levels of risk. Because although I say I never want to leave my house again, just by carpentry being on that list, that's not to say that people should immediately stop building things out of wood, correct?
Right. Yeah. So, well, there's one more category, and that's category 4, which is probably not cancerous, which is as close as you'll ever come to saying that something doesn't cause cancer. And you might sit there and go, oh, wow, that means the safe things, right? There is one item on that list.
Do tell. What is the safe thing?
It's called, I don't know if I can pronounce it, caprolactam. It's an organic compound used to make nylon. And it does not cause cancer, but it's still an irritant, mildly toxic, and you can kill rats if you feed it to them. But it does not cause cancer. No, no
Science
cancer.
Is awesome. Right there. Do you know why things are put into these risk groups in the first place? Like, is it just to terrify people?
No. It is, though maybe. It's mostly for things like environmental health and safety concerns. And for things like medical, you need to know if someone is, say, working with asbestos. Asbestos is a category 1. And you need to wear certain protections to protect you from inhaling asbestos and, developing cancer, because it's really bad. It basically allows you to form ideas about what kind of risk you're putting yourself in for various scenarios, and to develop protections. And also for things like category 2B, which is possibly causes cancer, it allows you to do more research.
Which is understandable. So now that cell phones have been put in that category, does anybody have any idea what the proposed mechanism for cell phone related cancer would be?
Yeah. This is the weird thing. So the idea is that cancers can be caused by things like radiation. Okay, specifically ionizing radiation. And so the concept here is that ionizing radiation can cause cancer, and cell phones cause radiation, so cell phones can cause cancer, right?
Okay.
The issue is ionizing radiation is actually a very specific kind of radiation. It's a radiation strong enough to detach electrons from atoms or molecules. This makes this molecule without the electron something we call a free radical. And you've probably heard of free radicals. Free radicals are dangerous. They're highly reactive. They like to stick to things. And when this happens to DNA or the molecules that control DNA, you get problems, and you eventually could run a higher risk of cancer. But ionizing radiation is a specific frequency. The common wisdom is that the radiation produced by cell phones is too low. So when people are trying to prove that cell phones cause cancer, they're either trying to discover a mechanism of radiation that causes cancer with cell phones via a different mechanism, or they're trying to show that non-ionizing radiation can still be ionizing.
Okay.
Which that second reason is just kind of silly. But the first one, there could, in theory, be a mechanism.
Right. So let's look at some of the studies that the WHO report looked at. Let's talk about effects of cell phone radio frequency signal exposure on brain glucose metabolism. Can you tell us about that?
This is a big one. It blew up on the internet back in March. Was it March? February. Late February, early March. And this blew up on the internet because everyone wanted to report on it and nobody knew what it meant. Because even the press release was so vague as to just say nothing. The press release basically said, so they did an MRI study. And they put people in the MRI, and they put cell phones against both of their ears. I think they used a Nokia. No, it was a Samsung flip phone. And they either turned the cell phone on, or they didn't turn the cell phone on. And when they turned it on, they had it receiving signal. I don't know if it was like playing anything, but it was receiving signal. And then they did MRIs. And so there's actually figures. I actually covered this on my blog, and you can see that there's actually activity in the brain in the area nearest to the cell phone. This is not an area that processes auditory stimuli. Well, actually, no, it is an area that processes auditory stimuli, actually. But if they weren't listening to anything, the cell phone was just on, so
right.
That was negated. But basically, they're saying that, oh, look, the brain here is activated, or there is increased glucose metabolism in this area of the brain when the cell phone is on. That is all.
So it didn't say it causes cancer.
No, didn't say that at all. It says there's increased glucose metabolism. And that means there's increased glucose metabolism. I mean, that could mean anything, honestly.
Even if they don't mention cancer and such, a lot has been made of that specific study's weaknesses in the first place.
Right.
And you covered that on your blog as well.
Yeah, so basically, they got increased glucose metabolism in the orbitofrontal cortex, which is an area a little bit higher than you'd normally think would be associated with the cell phone. They didn't get increased glucose metabolism in the inferior temporal gyrus. That's right next to the cell phone. They got nothing. So I'm sitting here going, that's where the radio frequency was the highest, and they didn't get anything. So I kind of wonder why that is. The other issue is heat. You know, these cell phones produce heat. If you've talked on your cell phone without a hands-free for a while, you'll notice it gets kind of warm, and that's probably where people start wondering, because it's kind of warm. But they didn't actually do measurements of heat and how that might penetrate the brain, which it probably does. Also, it's a 7% change they found in glucose metabolism. You get more than a 7% change in glucose metabolism when you form a sentence.
Really?
Yes, forming a sentence produces a 10% change in glucose metabolism.
You know, yeah. I like comparisons. These are very helpful for figuring out what exactly is going on.
Right. So, I mean, it showed that maybe there's an increase in brain activity closest to the cell phone. That's about all. I mean, they could show... I don't think they can even show that it was specifically caused by the radio frequency.
Well, and see, this seems to be a problem with a lot of the studies on cell phones that the WHO report looked at, or will look at. Sorry, the press release, at least. Ed Yong, the author of the blog Not Exactly Rocket Science, he broke down the problems that exist for practically all of these studies.
Yeah, so basically, he said, and I agree, the problem is a lot of these studies, particularly the ones looking at cancer, they often look over the past 10 to 20 year period, and cell phones have changed pretty drastically in the last 20 years. I mean, do you guys remember in Saved by the Bell when Zach picked up that gigantic cell phone that was the size of his head? They're very different now. And a lot of the studies they did are based on older models. Even the Volkow study on cell phones and brain metabolism, it used a Samsung flip phone. Not a lot of people are actually using those anymore. Many people have moved on to smartphones.
Right.
I mean, so it's not clear if that applies.
Also, the assessment issues were a big deal.
Yeah, they're all questionnaires. And, you have to ask questionnaires. Even if you were to call the company, I mean, there'd be privacy issues of calling the company and asking for records, things like that. But this basically relies on people accurately remembering their past cell phone use. And then you get problems with recall bias, because you have this, say you're doing a cancer study and you're someone who's been diagnosed with glioma, and this person comes up to you and goes, so, I see you've been diagnosed with glioma. Can you tell me how often you used your cell phone over the past 10 years? You're going to put 2 and 2 together because you're not stupid.
Right.
And you're going to sit there and go, I used it quite a bit. There were some in the Interphone study, which is the big one. They only found a small correlation between cell phone use and glioma at the very highest use, and these people were saying they had their phones glued to their ears for more than 5 hours a day.
Now, I read that, and I don't know how that's actually physically possible.
I have to say, as a teenager, I spent a lot of time on the phone, but I don't think I spent that much time. And also, I mean, does that apply now? I mean, now many people use hands-free. Now many people do texting and, much more web-based applications of phone use and not so much holding it to your ear.
Right.
But the recall bias is a big deal. People may be saying, oh, I never made phone calls or, oh yeah, I was on that thing all the time. And you don't actually know.
We have a question from the chat room from Grave Spinner.
Until now, we've been told there hasn't been enough years of usage to form a definitive link between phone use and cancer. What, if anything, has changed?
That's a good question. I think that now, certainly the past 5 to 10 years, there's been enough cell phone use that you could probably start asking some questions. But we really do need to run a study where we actually take people and give them cell phones and track their minutes and do it for, years, because probably this is going to be years of exposure. It's not, make a phone call once, wake up with cancer 2 years later. It's not like that. So I think that's a problem with these studies, is that there has been increasing use over the past 20 years. It hasn't leveled off.
It's not like the research has stopped, though, correct?
No, there's plenty of research still going on.
What do you think a really well-designed study of cell phones and cancer would look like then?
Of the ones I read, I liked the Interphone study, and I liked it because they had to go through 13 countries, but they managed to find 2,500-ish people with glioma and 2,700-ish people with meningioma. And it's hard to find these people because glioma, once you've been diagnosed, you have about 12 months to live. But they managed to get all these people from 13 countries, and they matched them. They matched them for controls living in the same area with the same rough level of education, with the same age, the same gender, everything they could possibly match, and then they just compared their cell phone use. That study found no correlations, except for the very, very highest level of cell phone use when people were saying their phones were glued to their ears 5 hours a day. So I kind of liked that one. I think the best possible study would be actually tracking people's use, like giving them a phone, getting all of their stuff, or taking away the phone.
That is never going to happen.
Yeah, you'd have to have a group of people who were
Amish.
basically matched, but the Amish aren't matched.
Oh.
They aren't matched. I mean, like, there's smaller numbers. They live in very different areas. They have highly different levels of education. There's all sorts of other things. They're not sex matched. They aren't exposed to many of the other things that people who use cell phones are exposed to, such as vaccines. The Amish don't vaccinate.
Right.
I mean, there's all sorts of other things. Even if even comparing to some hunter-gatherer tribe in the mountains of Peru, it wouldn't be the same.
So then what should we take from all this then? Should we be worried? Should we be kind of worried? Should we not worry at all?
I mean, the more I read about it, the more I feel that there's an issue with risk assessment here. People hear the words radiation, they hear the word cancer, and they just freak out. Because, whoa, dudes, it's radiation, it's cancer, let me get my tinfoil hat out, I'm a little scared. And you can't blame them, but that doesn't mean that things that could maybe cause cancer aren't pretty safe, like coffee or carpentry, and things that don't cause cancer are not necessarily good for you, like BPA. Doesn't cause cancer, but it's not good for you. And, there's a problem with risk assessment here. You hear stuff like that and it sounds really scary, but there's far more risk associated with things like driving while texting.
And there have been studies on that as well.
Yeah, so I think there's an error of risk assessment going on here, and people are probably worrying a lot more than they should. But that's not to say we don't need more studies.
I think we always need more studies about everything personally. But that's because I have a show to do. We have a question from David Bloomberg.
Given the poor scientific support for the claim that cell phones cause brain cancer, do you feel there was political pressure on the WHO committee to put cell phones in the possible category?
That's a difficult question. Maybe. The reality is, if it's not in Category 1 or Category 2A, which is probably causes cancer, it means almost nothing. Because the only reason people are having a field day with this is because of the phrase possibly causes cancer.
Right.
So I would mostly fault the WHO for really unfortunate definitions and terms, for using possibly causes cancer. But I could see maybe Category 3, which is unclassifiable, but Category 4 of definitely doesn't cause cancer, I don't see any mechanism for it to cause cancer, but you can't disprove that. So I don't know that we can do Category 4. So maybe...
I think maybe is allowable.
Yeah.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking, and we'll be right back after this.
On the next episode of Skeptically Speaking, it's an hour on the brain and the diseases and conditions unique to this amazing organ. We're joined by Dr. Richard J. McNally, researcher in the psychology department at Harvard University and author of What is Mental Illness? And we're joined by Maya Salavitz, author and editor at Time.com's Healthland blog, to discuss the chemistry and controversy of antidepressant medications. That's next week on Skeptically Speaking on your local radio station or online at skepticallyspeaking.com.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell, and I'm here with Scicurious, a pseudonymed postdoctoral researcher who is particularly interested in neurophysiology, who is also the author of the fantastic, hilarious, you have to be reading this blog, Neurotic Physiology.
Aw, thanks.
Oh, no, I mean that. So let's talk about something else that cell phones are said to affect. And I know I'm already receiving questions on this from the audience, which is hilarious. We're going to talk again about semen.
Woo!
So you've looked into the recent study, Impact of Cell Phone Use on Men's Semen Parameters. So what exactly are they trying to find?
I've actually covered a couple studies on cell phones and semen. Some of them are hilarious. My favorite is this one that tried to do semen in a dish, and they just held a cell phone over it. And we're like, oh, look, it changed stuff in the dish, so it means something. Don't put a cell phone next to your ejaculated semen. That's probably pretty good common sense right there.
Right.
But this one, they took a bunch of guys from a fertility clinic, and they took the sperm that they already had, which is good because, asking people for extra samples of that is sometimes awkward. And they assessed semen parameters. They did abnormal morphology, and they looked at testosterone, and they looked at some other stuff. They managed to get 1,000 dudes in this study that didn't use cell phones, and I was super impressed until I realized the study went back to 1993.
That explains so much.
It really does. But they showed that, or they say they showed that people who used cell phones had more abnormal sperm morphology than those who did not. But the error bars on that are the size of the graph. So,
yeah. What would you conclude from that study then?
It really doesn't look like there was anything here. They were very cautious, and they stayed with speculate. But here's the thing: that set of dudes they got was not a representative sample. They chose only men from a fertility clinic. These people are seeking treatment for infertility. So that sample's going to have some problems.
That seems very obvious to the layperson here.
Well, it's you work with what you got.
Okay.
The problem is also the study was retrospective. They took samples they already had. So no control for things like lifestyle factors. How much cell phone use? Do the people who use the cell phones have more or less of an active lifestyle, which correlates with infertility? Does the group that uses cell phones have a higher or a lower BMI? That's correlated with infertility. What about high stress? Correlated with infertility. They did not control for any of these.
So why did this make such a big splash, this study, then?
Because it's about sperm.
Right.
Yeah.
Noted.
Well, and because, people are very concerned about their junk. Yeah, there's been an increase in infertility in the United States in men. Or at least there's a reported increase. That could be due to things like increases in actual reporting of this problem. It's kind of a humbling thing to admit, Mm-hmm. It could be increases in environmental estrogens, which there has been an increase in. Increases in other porn use. Cycling can give you problems with infertility. So there's a lot of other things out there, but people are very concerned about the current decrease and what could be causing it, and we'll look at anything at this point.
Well, you actually wrote about a study proposal that would solve a lot of these issues.
So you need to gather some dudes, and you need to control for the age, the weight, the lifestyle, the BMI, the drug use, the relationship status. I want to know how much they sit. I want to know what their leisure activities are. I want to know everything. I need to know how often they masturbate, actually. I need to know if they have kids. Things like that. How often they're having sex. And you need to take away their cell phones for at least 5 months, because it takes about 130 days for sperm to completely turn over, for all the way from the beginning outward. And then you need to take a sperm count. Take some hormone levels, whatever. Give half of those dudes, not the other half, their cell phones. You want to know when they carry it, where they carry it, how long it's on, patterns of usage. This is why you need a lot of men, because you're going to have differential patterns of usage. Do that for 5 months. Take a sperm count. Take it away again for 5 months. Take a final sperm count. It's a long study, but it would actually have enough of a control that you could maybe see if there was an effect there on actual sperm counts and on hormones and on everything else. But, how many guys are going to give up their cell phones for 15 months?
Not a chance.
Right. No volunteers.
No. This is not the only study of this type, the cell phones' effect on semen. So what's your conclusion about the body of research on it then?
I have not actually found a single study with cell phones and semen that I'm actually satisfied with. We need more semen. Wait. Never mind. But anyway, I haven't found one that's very well controlled, and that's not always the scientist's fault. I mean, you're working with people. People are not well controlled, just in general. Very bad for variability.
So if you were personally, completely speculatively, but, with a fairly informed opinion, were to rate this on the WHO's risk scale, kind of where would this go?
Well,
if there was a risk scale about cell phones or infertility.
And fertility,
mm-hmm.
I would put it pretty down there. I would put it on, say, category 3. Because category 1 would be things like repeated kickings in the nuts, castration.
Don't do that, people. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
If people have to be told that, maybe infertility is not their biggest problem. We have a question from the audience. It's from Stephanie from Minneapolis.
Given what we know about the effects of cell phones on semen production, what would we need to do to design a cell phone holster that would be effective as a contraceptive?
Because there was a study that was done that showed that it did have some effect, correct?
Yes. Yeah. There's some possible effects. I mean, it could be heat, So wait, if we're talking about using your cell phone to actually cause contraception?
Or a cell phone holster or something.
A holster to actually...
A gun, perhaps. Like a contraceptive gun.
I'd say you'd need to, sling the cell phone, beneath your balls and keep it, continuously on, maybe. Something very strong. But, of course, then, you might have the heat production. I mean, the heat production might actually be to blame there. But I do think, people do worry about, trying to reduce radiation from their phones. And the reality is that the more you reduce the radiation from your phone, the less signal you're going to have. So it's kind of a trade-off. You could maybe design cozy to protect you, like a lead cozy.
The visual in my head is remarkable right now. That does not translate at all to the radio. Okay, so next topic.
Oh, wait, I just had another idea of how to use a cell phone as a contraceptive.
Do it.
So I was thinking you could make your cell phone ring really loud farting noises. A woman would never go near you. Perfect contraceptive.
You are so multi-purpose. Honestly.
Maybe alternate with vomiting noises.
You realize if someone makes that now, you're totally going to get a cut. We have this on air.
I think it already exists, actually.
I weep for humanity. Okay, cell phones and bees. A study came out fairly recently, and it didn't make as much of a splash as the WHO report, but it did make its rounds on the internet. And since you and I had a cell phone episode planned, I sent you the article, and you wrote a blog post. Talk about the first blog post.
Right. Yeah, this was, oh man,
No, this is awesome. You got to tell the story.
Some days I'm just not with it. Okay, we'll preface this by saying I don't know a lot about bees. I don't necessarily like to be in extremely close proximity to them, in my car or whatever. So basically, all I knew going into this was that there's been a decrease in the bee population. And we all know this. Everybody knows that something's killing off the bees, colony collapse disorder, no more bees. And we know this is a problem. And so basically they took a whole bunch of beehives and they put either regular cell phones in there that were off on cell phones or on cell phones that were receiving a call. And what they recorded was the sound inside the hive. Okay. And they got increased sound inside the hive when the cell phones were on. When the cell phones were just on standby, they got nothing. And when the cell phones were off, they got nothing. And so they took this and said, oh, it must mean that cell phones are causing colony collapse disorder. And I was like, no, that just kind of means don't put your cell phone in a beehive. So I wasn't particularly convinced there. Plus, taking a cell phone call in a beehive, terrible reception, and the noise, But what convinced me in this particular study was the discussion section, where they started coming up with all these studies about cell phone towers causing changes in honeybee foraging.
Right.
And, electromagnetic field potentials impacting bee behavior. And I was like, oh my God, what if, you guys? And I kind of went, maybe this isn't impossible. So that's what I wrote.
And just to make sure people understand this, you didn't say, yes, this is happening. You said, maybe this is possible.
I said maybe it was possible.
Maybe,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was an interesting preliminary concept. Yeah.
So why did you change your mind?
Well, Twitter. This guy Jonathan on Twitter tweeted me and was like, dude, you are so wrong. And I was like, what? Explain. And he did. Pretty soon we were messaging back and forth on Twitter, and he sent me a whole bunch of links, and wow, I was so wrong. Because, the issue is people tend to cite the papers which will prove their point.
Right.
They tend to not cite papers that do not prove their point. And I think of that when I'm reading papers in my field. I go, oh, they didn't cite these guys. I know why. But when you're reading a paper about bees, you're like, oh, they must be honest. And they are honest. They're just, trying to prove their point. And so, yeah, it left out a bunch of other reasons that colony collapse disorder might be occurring. And a lot of those reasons are a lot better supported than cell phones.
So what did you do after this influx of information?
Well, I admitted I was wrong on the internet. Yeah, so I wrote another post, and I said, okay, so this is what colony collapse disorder is, and this is why I screwed up, and here's what probably actually is causing colony collapse disorder, and don't take cell phone calls in a beehive.
Okay, I need to point out that this is how science works, people. This right here. Provided with new information, Sci revised her hypothesis. Correct?
If I'd known that everyone was going to be so happy that I wrote a correcting post saying, oh my God, you guys, I was wrong, I'm going to be wrong all the time. I'll be the most popular person on the internet.
Well, this is the issue, though, is people often have trouble saying that they're wrong. So we all get very excited when someone is brave enough to actually do so.
Well, people shouldn't be afraid to say they're wrong. See how much praise you get for it?
So what would you warn other people about things to watch out for when they're looking at studies outside their field then?
Well, first off, if you're reading any studies about insects at all, read this guy Alex Wild at Myrmekos, and then read this girl Bug Girl. I believe she blogs on one of the skeptic sites, but she also has her own entomology blog, and she's fantastic. She's really good. Definitely read her. But if you're reading things outside the field, just approach things with a healthy sense of skepticism. Look for other sources and look for other things on the same subject and see if they all say the same thing.
Well, bearing that in mind.
This question comes from Medhutsidin Caddy. Mobile phone towers, not just handset radiation, but also transmission from towers, has also been linked with the decline of house sparrows across their native range in Eurasia. I have trouble coming up with a plausible biological model for that one too, but I keep hearing people bringing it up, even in the published scientific literature. Thoughts?
Okay, so I'm not an ornithologist, so my first thought is I'm not an ornithologist. I saw that tweet, actually, and I looked up a couple of things, and I've seen the links, but I haven't seen the actual published literature on this. It just seems a little... Sparrows were introduced from Eurasia to the rest of Europe by the Romans, who actually had a taste for sparrows. They ate them. And they've been around since then, and they've done pretty well. Sparrows are hardy little birds. They've survived several world wars, the rise of the Industrial Revolution, and now they're going to fall over in a faint because of electromagnetic frequencies from cell phones. There's been other things. There's been, loss of habitat. In Europe in particular, after World War II, there's been a major decrease in arable land. There could be competitors. I don't know that cell phones would be my first guess, but I'm not an ornithologist, so grain of salt.
And a question from the chat, Karina Bay.
After reading the WHO report, do you plan to change your own cell phone use habits? Will you use a Bluetooth more often, or use your cell phone less often, or make no changes?
Me, I communicate only via the internet. I am, in fact, a cat with an internet connection, so... No, actually, I tend to use a hands-free just because I tend to use a hands-free. It's more convenient for me. But no, probably not.
So what would you tell your mother to do, let's say?
My mom actually asked about this. She called and asked.
Absolutely.
Yeah. She'll be fine. I told her she's fine. So she's already had a benign, thank goodness, brain tumor removed. So she's had experience, but I think she'll be cool.
She's had experience with brain tumors.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Another question actually from Grave Spinner from the chat.
Have the recent scares about cell phones lent credibility to the scares about living in proximity to power lines, radar sites, cell towers, or other RF sources?
That depends on what you mean by credibility. I think they probably do make people more concerned and worried, but I also think that's probably an issue of risk assessment. Like we were talking about before. You hear some things and they make you scared, and who can blame you? There's a lot of scary things in the world. But I think it might, make people take some of that more seriously, certainly more seriously than they should.
And a related question from the chat, Skeptic Kitty.
Is the large amount of misinformation available solely the fault of poor scientific reporting in the media? And what are some of the negative consequences?
Oh, everybody always blames the media.
I know.
That's not fair. I don't think that's solely the result. I mean, certainly there are a lot of people out there who will take something and run with it. And if something gets high hits on the internet and it's up there high on Google, people tend to trust it. And you shouldn't do that. Skeptical mind to everything, people. But, we're humans. We're trustworthy. It's in print. I don't think it's entirely due to poor science reporting. But I think maybe partially. And I feel bad for that because a lot of people in the media, they have to spin things so they get ratings. And so it sounds like a story. Or they don't have a job. So I kind of understand, but that doesn't make it right.
No, and agreed. Everybody likes a good story. But I guess the problem is, you have a science background, but the majority of the public doesn't even have that. So right. How do you propose that people sort all this out, all these different messages and hyperbole and such? I mean, I was seeing Facebook posts from my less science-inclined friends that led me to believe that they thought that the WHO press release had said that cell phones do cause cancer. That's the thing.
That's telephone right there. That game of telephone. Yep.
Absolutely. So what's your advice for regular people then? The ones who get their news from newspapers or the TV?
Right. Well, I would say remain skeptical, but also pursue other avenues of information. You can go on the internet. There are several sites out there run by reputable organizations. I think the Society for Neuroscience has something to say on cell phones and brain cancer. You can go to the World Health Organization's website. They have this report online, and you can read the whole thing. And it's not incomprehensible gibberish. I mean, some of the chemical names are, but the rest of it's okay. And you can do reading, or you can ask experts. I hear there are scientists on the internet. And some of us take questions.
You take many questions, and we appreciate it. And I think that's it for our time. Thanks very much for being here, Sci.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You can find Scicurious at scientopia.org/blogs/Scicurious, or at the much easier link on our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, do click the links to Twitter, to Facebook, and to iTunes, where you can listen to past episodes, subscribe to the show, or leave a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Skeptically Speaking.
Bring it on. The skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, break the spell of Pavlov's bells. Cause we're skeptically speaking on mind reading, tarot cards and witches, psychics, and their spoon-bending mind tricks. All the humbug, flim-flam, frauds and shams, the charlatan who I don't think you understand. It's the hocus pocus, out of focus locus, eroding the brain, making gains on the hopeless. Let the crystal ball fall, smash on the floor, leave the pieces alone. We don't need them anymore. Just a microscope, telescope, magnifier, reading in between the lines of these lies. Bring it on. The skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is. Cause we're skeptically speaking.
Skeptically Speaking is produced with the support of CJSR 88.5 FM in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Our studio assistants are Brent Kelly and Lisa Skovanek. Ryan Bromsgrove is our studio technician and research assistant. The show is produced and edited by K.O. Myers. Our theme song was written and recorded by AOK. And I'm your host, Desiree Schell.